On a desolate, misty road, a line of carriages slowly moves forward. Inside one of the carriages, two children are sitting, with the blonde girl being the more talkative of the two. She smiles at the boy beside her and asks, "You're 12 too, right? So, who's going to be the older one here?" The boy, with a serious expression, clutches something as if it were a treasure. Hearing the blonde girl's enthusiastic chatter, he indifferently replies that if she wants, she can be the older one. To his surprise, the girl seems disappointed and falls silent. Sensing that she prefers being the innocent, protected younger sister instead of the older one, he eventually gives in, saying, "Then you can be the younger sister." The blonde girl, dressed in a doll-like outfit, is startled and flustered, insisting that she never said she wanted to be the younger sister. What's more important, she explains, is that they are about to become family. Hearing the word family, the boy grows contemplative. He gazes out of the window as the trees slowly fade into the distance, realizing that once the carriages reach their destination, he will become part of a family with complete strangers. As the boy snaps out of his thoughts, he recalls that not long ago, he had lived with his own family. At this point, the author realizes they haven't introduced the main character yet. His name is Boris Jinman, a 12-year-old boy with a soul seemingly aged by many trials. He is the second son of Jurgen Jinman, the lord of the land of Travaix-Longard. The story flashes back to 12 years ago at the Jinman estate. All members of the Jinman family gather in a room, where the central focus is the coffin of a woman. Although her face is covered, it seems clear that she was incredibly beautiful when alive, at least that's what people say, though the narrator humorously admits they can't personally verify this. A nursemaid is tasked with carrying away a small boy, signaling that the woman in the coffin has passed away. The Jinman family, a prestigious martial clan, had high hopes for the birth of Boris Jinman. He was destined to become a brave warrior, inheriting the family's legendary ice sword and snow armor. These rare, powerful artifacts, akin to exclusive SSS-level items in games, would be used by Boris and his older brother Yevgen to conquer the virtual world. The woman in the coffin was the matriarch of the Jinman family, and her death intensified the patriarch's disdain for his illegitimate children. In Boris's memories, he fondly recalls his kind older brother Yevgen, who loved him dearly. However, the land of Travaix is not as forgiving, engulfed in flames and chaos due to uprisings. The chaos is orchestrated by Boris's uncle, a disgraced and vengeful figure expelled from the family, who seeks to reclaim his power. No matter what misfortunes befall Boris and his family, he, along with the surviving members, vows to ensure that the cruel oppressors do not thrive or rule over them. Thoughts of kinship, kindness, and the malicious plots remind Boris that he must survive at least until this suffering world is erased. After all, one chosen by the Holy Sword cannot be allowed to die. Thus begins the unfolding of his past story. On a stormy day at the Jinman estate in Travaix, Boris Jinman listens quietly to his nursemaid's serious warning. She tells him, "Young Master Boris, no matter what happens, you must never approach that lake. At night, especially during thunderstorms like today, its eyes glow in the dark, waiting to devour anyone who dares come close. So, you must stay away from Lake Ara at all costs." This warning hints at something significant and possibly dangerous connected to the lake, setting the stage for Boris's journey ahead. Ending the flashback, young Boris and his older brother, Yevgen, lie beneath a large tree, basking in the sunlight. As Boris recounts the warning about Lake Ara and the rumors of a red-eyed ghost, Yevgen reflects for a moment before gently patting Boris's face and smiling warmly, reassuring him, "Don't worry, Boris. I'll always be here for you." What was meant to be a heartfelt moment strikes Boris as slightly odd, but he brushes it off with a smile. The two brothers joyfully play on the grass until Yevgen picks up a wooden sword, reminding Boris that it's time for their practice. Boris eagerly charges forward, but he quickly realizes that a child cannot defeat a grown man. Yevgen effortlessly dodges and advises Boris to maintain the proper distance while wielding the sword, emphasizing the importance of technique. Boris, undeterred, continues to swing his wooden sword, and the two brothers engage in a mix of serious and playful practice. Eventually, Boris manages to tackle Yevgen, causing both to tumble onto the grass. Their laughter and playful fight are observed by Jurgen Jinman, the head of the Jinman family, through the window. A courtier comments that Yevgen seems very fond of his younger brother, while Boris is clearly very attached to him. This deep brotherly bond does not please Jurgen Jinman at all. He feels dissatisfied, believing that the heir to the family should not appear so pitiful and that this is not the time for laziness. Just then, a rumbling sound reverberates through the building, interrupting their conversation, and Jurgen senses that something ominous is approaching. Meanwhile, while Boris continues to sword fight with his brother, he can't shake off a strange feeling lingering in his heart. When Yevgen urges him to grip the sword tightly and attack, Boris responds with caution and even a bit of aggression. Yevgen is taken aback by Boris's intensity and reminds him that he is too close. The unease Boris feels causes him to let his guard down, resulting in a wooden sword strike to his face. Although it's just a practice sword, it still hurts. Yevgen quickly drops his sword and rushes to his brother, apologizing frantically and promising it won't happen again. In Boris's brotherly embrace, he feels an unfamiliar fear as if someone is coming to take his life. Before he can shake off the pain, a frantic voice calls out from a distance. A terrified servant rushes in, warning Yevgen and Boris not to return to the Jinman estate. The situation is dire, and the servant struggles to catch his breath as he reveals shocking news: Vlad Jinman has returned. As Boris lies in his brother's embrace, he feels a chill. The strange, uncontrollable feeling was a premonition of the tragedy to come. The once sunny sky darkens ominously. At the estate's entrance, Vlad sneers at the family's guard dog, taunting it with a malicious smile, as if to say, "Have you forgotten your old master so soon, you foolish dog?" In his study, Jurkin sits with a frown, visibly filled with anger and alertness. His butler leans in, asking if Vlad should be allowed inside the estate. After a moment of contemplation, Jurkin agrees. Vlad enters his old home and greets Jurkin, but the interaction lacks any warmth of brotherly affection. Jurkin remains unfazed by Vlad's presence and sarcastically remarks, "It's been 5 years since I expelled you. I'm surprised you're still alive, Vlad." In response, Vlad smiles wickedly, his face shrouded in darkness, and asks if Jurkin is disappointed to see him. Jurkin internally reflects on his inability to understand his brother's motives, questioning, "Why did you come here again? Why did you come all the way here to die?" Vlad casually surveys Jurkin's study, commenting that nothing has changed except for the items, which have only aged. He smiles and urges his brother to offer him a drink. He spent more than half a day rushing here to confide. Despite their estrangement, it's clear Vlad has a purpose for his visit. Understanding his brother's nature, Jurkin doesn't refuse and asks the butler to bring 2 glasses of wine. After years apart, the brothers finally sit together at the same table, a rare sight indeed. Vlad leisurely sips his drink and suddenly asks Jurkin if he remembers their childhood. Vlad reminisces about their childhood, recalling fond memories of sparring and playing together on the Longard Plains, but it is clear that their relationship has become strained over the years. As he recalls, Vlad speaks of the times they would skip training to play on the grassy hills, only to be caught later. He remembers Jurkin, the elder brother, always being the one scolded by their father for not being a proper example. This nostalgic memory, however, contrasts sharply with their current relationship, filled with tension and unresolved conflicts. Jurkin, seemingly indifferent to their shared memories, presses Vlad for his intentions. Vlad, unfazed, smiles and quickly shifts to the matter at hand. He brings up the royal court, mentioning that Prince Khan, his ally, will soon be named heir. He warns that the Jinman family may become a target for the prince, stating his return is to protect Jurkin and their family from impending threats. Upon hearing Vlad's words, Jurkin realizes that his brother has cunningly survived the past 5 years. He demands that Vlad leave the estate immediately. Vlad sighs, reminding Jurkin that this estate and the family belong to both of them, inherited from their parents. This statement enrages Jurkin, who coldly counters that the Jinman family has long disowned Vlad and that their sister, Yenishka, dead unjustly because of him. Vlad chuckles coldly, reminding Jurkin to reconsider and questioning whether the blame lies solely with him. Angered, Jurkin retorts that if it weren't for Vlad's treacherous schemes, Yenishka might have been happily living with her fiancé now. This recollection drives Vlad into a frenzy as he shouts that it was not him who drove Yenishka to madness and death, in Jurkin himself. Angered by Vlad's ridiculous excuses, Jurkin throws his glass of wine at him. Vlad, wiping his face with a smirk, remarks that Jurkin remains as pathetic as ever. He continues, suggesting that the stubbornness of the people in Travaix has already divided the family. He questions whether Jurkin's sons would be any different from them. Jurkin, tired of the conversation, commands Vlad to leave immediately. Vlad warns Jurkin that this is the last opportunity for reconciliation, reminding him that their brotherhood could lead to forgiveness for past mistakes. If they can reach an agreement, Prince Khan would overlook Jurkin's actions. With a sinister smile, Vlad demands the Winterer family heirloom. Infuriated, Jurkin immediately draws his sword, insisting that he would rather die than hand over anything to Vlad. Vlad, unable to persuade Jurkin, leaves with a sinister smile, warning that he will take everything from him. Once Vlad departs, Jurkin turns to the window and instructs his butler, Tulk, to begin preparations for defense, signaling that it's time to fortify against the impending threat. The tension between the brothers escalates, foreshadowing an inevitable confrontation as Jurkin steels himself for the challenges ahead. It was raining heavily outside. Yevgen quickly carries Boris as they rush after the butler, Tulk, to the second floor where their father is. Yevgen intends to use the legendary Winterbottom, a suit of armor earned through the defeat of a rival lord and 90 foes, alongside the legendary ice sword acquired after years of battle. These artifacts have been passed down through the Jinman family, symbolizing their legacy and power. Boris, surprised by the mention of the Winterer, feels the weight of their family's history and the impending conflict. The Winterer, weapons of legendary status meant only for the strongest warriors, have become mere myths over centuries. However, they are currently in the rightful hands of their true master. At this moment, Yevgen grips the ice sword in front of Boris, readying himself for the imminent dead or live battle. In the past, a cold winter night at the Jinman estate, Jurkin leads his eldest son to witness the family heirloom, a powerful artifact forged from the ice sword and snow armor, known as the Winterer. Unbeknownst to them, a young boy secretly follows behind. These legendary items, earned through the defeat of countless enemies, are coveted by Vlado, adding tension to the family's legacy. This moment foreshadows the significance of these weapons in the unfolding conflict and their connection to the family's dark past. Yevgen looked at the precious object shining in the basement of the Jinman ancestral mansion and couldn't help but be amazed. So it turns out that it really is inside the Jinman family estate. Jurkin, seeing Yevgen's astonished reaction, relaxed a bit and said, "To see even you marvel like this, it seems that my silence all this time has not been in vain." He continued to recount how their grandfather had divided a treasure between him and Vlado, hoping that both would support and help each other in preserving and protecting the kingdom. But in the end, their grandfather made a mistake, as the Winterer set only unleashes its full power when both pieces are used together. Hearing the truth about this precious object, Yevgen became even more horrified, slowly understanding something. Jurkin didn't hesitate to remind his eldest son, Yevgen, that this year he would turn 20 and it was time for him to learn how to become the heir of the Jinman family. After a moment of contemplation, Jurkin continued, expressing his desire for Yevgen to escape wearing the Winterer outfit if the family ever faced danger. No matter what happened, Yevgen had to survive, for the sake of the family and to protect the Jinman family heirloom. Only when Yevgen was alive could the family truly live. Upon hearing this, Yevgen felt like a rock had been dropped into the depths of his heart. If that day ever came, his father wanted him to run away alone. Faced with Jurkin's seriousness, Yevgen could only obey his command. Boris Jinman, hidden behind the door, heard everything clearly, but his thoughts remained uncertain. But Yevgen is not as cold-blooded as his father. As soon as he received the Winterer set, Yevgen took it to his room and called Boris to introduce it to him. Even though the sneak peek wasn't as good as a direct view, Boris couldn't help but marvel at the pure light emanating from the ice sword and armor. So cool. Yevgen smiled and asked his younger brother which one looked cooler between the two. Boris, slightly confused by the conversation between his older brother and father the day before, still answered honestly. Despite the armor looking quite heavy to wear, he thought the sword still looked a bit cooler. Yevgen easily grasped the answer and handed over the precious sword to Boris, saying, "Then I will keep the sword for you. When you are old enough to wield it, I will give it to you." Boris was astonished as he held the valuable sword, but indeed, for a young child, handling such a large sword was a bit challenging. Yevgen gently lifted it up with him, smiling and repeating once again, "This sword belongs to you, Boris." Not only at that moment, but for a long time after, his older brother always reminded him that the sword was his. After being psychologically manipulated for a while, Boris truly began to feel that it was his own. But regardless, he was still just a child, and as his father had said, the sword was originally meant to belong to his older brother. He could never truly possess it. Returning to the present, Yevgen didn't hide anything and informed his younger brother about the current situation. Uncle Vlado was bringing in armed forces, so they had to follow their father's plan precisely. Boris, upon hearing the words armed forces, started to remember the past. The butler, Tulk, had also told him about the internal conflicts that occurred within the family, where there were only winners and losers, with no right or wrong. This meant that no matter how many lives were lost, no one would be held accountable, and no one would acknowledge or mourn for them. Tulk had warned him to be careful back then, as no one understood this better than a Trevakian. With the help of the servant, Yevgen managed to find 2 hidden treasures in this room. Boris looked towards Boris, expressing his desire to borrow his sword for a moment until the chaos ends. After a moment of contemplation, Boris tightly clenched his fist, indicating that he didn't need it back. After all, the ice sword belonged to his older brother, Yevgen, as their father had entrusted it to him, not Boris. Thinking about the words of the steward, Tulk, Boris understood that his older brother Yevgen would be the last one standing, and he hoped that Yevgen would mourn for him. Upon hearing this, Yevgen fell silent and then placed a hand on Boris' shoulder, gently reminding his younger brother once again that the ice sword belonged to Boris, and he wouldn't take it away unless Boris allowed it. After the chaos ends, Yevgen promised to personally return it to him. Boris still hesitated, knowing that he couldn't even handle a regular sword at the moment, let alone the ice sword. Yevgen continued to comfort him, reminding him that they had trained together with swords before, so a little weight wouldn't be a problem. After all, Boris was a warrior, and Yevgen believed that his younger brother would be able to handle it. With the comforting words of his older brother, Boris felt a sense of relief. However, the peaceful scene didn't last long, as fierce flames began to rise in the distance, advancing towards the Jinman estate. Deep down, everyone knew that the battle had begun. In that distant place, heroic sounds and blazing torches resounded, all united for one purpose: to demand justice and change the leader of the Jinman clan. The clan's owner would return to the most deserving person, and they would only serve the new master, working together to restore prosperity to the clan. That was what they desired. Jurkin stood solemnly, looking down from above. He wore his armor and was prepared for this battle. But when he saw the seemingly brainwashed crowd below, he couldn't help but sigh. How could these people be swayed by the mad words of Vlado? Even though the current strength of the clan couldn't compare to its golden age when his father was still alive, Jurkin remained steadfast. They still had loyal Jinman soldiers, and this battle would not be lost. Jurkin stepped out from the other door and shouted loudly at the torch-wielding crowd. The people below, upon seeing Jurkin's appearance, erupted in a chorus of insults. When Jurkin realized Vlado still hadn't shown himself, he shouted once again, "If the mastermind intends to hide like a coward, then we shall make this place shine the brightest tonight." Behind him, the steward Tulk followed his master's orders and began to unleash his power towards the front. In the face of the fire magic and the blazing flames, the Jinman clan's soldiers also charged forward, united in their desire to kill the rebellious Vlado and his army. Faced with this resounding power, the people below truly began to panic. Jurkin saw the favorable situation and was about to deliver a moral sermon when suddenly he felt a terrifying surge of power emanating from behind him, causing the mansion to tremble. Above the Jinman estate, a half-snake, half-dragon monster summoned from the icy realm appeared. Its name was Krygel. With its mere presence, it shattered half of the Jinman mansion. Jurkin was shocked when he saw the Krygel monster, as only 3 people in Trevex could summon it. He glanced down at the crowd below and indeed spotted Jongnal, the great sorcerer of Prince Khan. It seemed strange that Prince Khan had entrusted Jongnal to Vlado. This meant that Vlado's position was absolutely secure. The Jinman mansion began to crumble under the attack of the Krygel, and Jurkin knew that the current situation was changing rapidly. He immediately redirected the people to evacuate the mansion, leaving only the 2 guilds to hold their ground and quickly devise a plan B. While evacuating the civilians, Jurkin unexpectedly came across Yevgen and Boris running in the opposite direction. Jurkin quickly approached Boris and urged him to come with him, leaving Yevgen to escape on his own. Yevgen disagreed with this suggestion and was immediately shouted at by his father, reminding him that he couldn't leave with a child and to remember the precious thing he had to protect. Faced with his father's words, Yevgen had no choice but to leave, suppressing his pain. Boris followed his father, reflecting on Jurkin's words. In reality, he was the burden of his older brother. Yevgen's mission was to live and protect the family heirloom, while Boris, on the other hand, couldn't even protect the family if he were to survive. Although it made sense in theory, an inexplicable sense of unease continued to haunt Boris. Seeing his older brother running in the opposite direction with his ice sword at his side, he feared that there was more danger than meets the eye. Most of the people in the mansion had been evacuated, yet the Krygel monster continued to relentlessly destroy the buildings. The soldiers fought back fiercely, but the situation was becoming increasingly chaotic. Gazing at the mansion that had been meticulously built over the years, only to be destroyed in an instant, Jurkin's anger intensified. How dare Vlado destroy the mansion? He would never forgive the old man. Immediately, Jurkin ordered Tulk to assess the condition of the 1st and 2nd battalions. Tulk swiftly deployed his psychic powers, and a vivid image appeared, a camera running on rice. As expected, Jinman was at a disadvantage and couldn't retreat to the mansion. Assessing the current situation, Jurkin decided to attack both exits of the mansion, dividing the remaining soldiers into 2 groups. First, they had to retreat to the nearby forest. Boris, feeling a tremor of fear, looked towards his father, but Jurkin coldly reminded him that everything would be fine. For now, he should stop complaining like a child. After all, Boris was only 12 years old. Krygl was indeed powerful, but it couldn't harm living creatures in this world, as its other half resided in a different realm. Upon receiving his master's command, Tulk immediately used his psychic powers to create a path. Jurkin turned to Boris and instructed him to follow slowly and then retreat towards the meadow when the battle began. Boris was confused, not knowing where to run. Jurkin remained silent for a moment before providing an answer: head to Lake Ara. Upon hearing this, Boris became frightened, wondering about the evil spirit's soul. Now was not the time to be afraid, Jurkin shouted. A member of the Jinman clan couldn't be foolish, and besides, no one dared to venture there because of the rumors. After all, the most dangerous place was also the safest. Near the lake, there were 3 black-rooted trees where Jurkin wanted Boris to hide. He would come to fetch him after the battle was over. Boris panicked upon hearing this, but before he could react, Jurkin ordered the soldiers to charge and fight to the end. Faced with the fierce onslaught and his father's urging, Boris immediately turned and ran towards the Lake Ara, praying silently that it would spare him, believing that the whole story was just a fabrication. The intense battle was still raging, and at last, Vlado made his grand entrance. Once again, he stepped onto the stage with his gleaming white porcelain teeth. With a sinister smile, he unleashed his dark and ominous sword, striking down the Jinman soldiers one by one. Each one fell like withered leaves, and Vlado trampled upon their lifeless bodies, shouting for his long-lost brother to show himself. Back then, he treated him like a criminal, casting him out of the clan and seizing the throne for himself. Did he ever imagine that he would end up hiding and skulking like a frightened mouse? In the distance, a soldier had discovered the whereabouts of Jurkin Jinman and immediately shouted to his master. Upon hearing this, Vlado calmly walked forward, knowing that today would be the day when the Dark Blade, RUNE, would replace by Winterer of the Silver White. On this side, Jurkin was surrounded by a group of Vlado soldiers who wanted to take his life, but a middle-aged man raised in the Montessori method had nothing to fear from these ants. With just a few basic moves, he could easily send someone to heaven. But things were not that easy. While fighting the fierce ants, Jurkin suddenly felt a bit of stomach pain. Looking down, he realized it wasn't from eating too much seafood this morning, but from being secretly stabbed by Vlado. Standing behind, Vlado laughed loudly, mocking his brother's slowed reflexes, remarking that Jurkin had grown old. As if the pain of aging wasn't enough, Vlado didn't hesitate to stab Jurkin again in the stomach, causing him to spit blood. Sensing the situation, Tulk rushed over. Vlado aimed to finish Jurkin, but Tulk quickly outmaneuvered him, deploying a mist ability that obscured everyone's view. While Vlado swung his sword again, by the time the mist cleared, Tulk and Jurkin had vanished, leaving only a trail of blood behind. On the protagonist's side, Boris, following his father's orders, dashed frantically toward Lake Ara. As he ran, fear gnawed at him, and when he saw the black tree trunk, he quickly hid behind it. But before he could catch his breath, a strange sound echoed through the forest. Boris, only 12 years old, had heard many legends about Lake Ara and couldn't help but tremble. Though terrified, he tried to reassure himself, thinking his father had finished the task and was coming to get him. But life rarely goes as planned. The strange sound suddenly stopped, and instead, from behind him, a mass of bizarre tendrils lunged forward, wrapping around Boris and knocking him to the ground. Once fully conscious again, Boris saw what was holding him, a grotesque monster. Boris gasped in horror. Could this be the evil spirit of Lake Ara? In front of the terrifying monster, Boris realized that the nanny was right, the evil spirit was real. But why had his father sent him to the tree? As the monster lunged at him and Boris thought he was about to meet his end, he felt a surge of defiance and screamed, desperately calling for his father and brother. At that moment, a pure white light slashed through the air, hitting the monster repeatedly. After a few minutes, it succumbed in agony. Boris collapsed on the ground, looking up to see his brother Yevgen, who was supposed to have fled long ago. Yevgen, panicked at finding Boris in such a dangerous place, was relieved to see him unharmed. He rushed to embrace his brother. Feeling safe in Yevgen's arms, Boris broke down in tears, recounting how their father had ordered him to wait here. Yevgen was shocked but kept silent, gently wiping a smear of blood from his brother's face. Yevgen softly shared his thoughts. Unlike their father, he believed that family was more important than any treasure. What good would these relics be if everyone died? After all, no one could protect them forever. No one outlives a relic. Boris continued to ask, "How did you know I was here?" Yevgen smiled gently and replied, "I'm your brother. No matter where you are, I'll protect you." Just then, a flash of light appeared behind them. Yevgen gripped Boris's shoulders and seriously reminded him, "Vlado isn't our only enemy. Crown Prince Khan has allied with him, supplying soldiers and mages." Khan seeks the snow armor, the ice sword, and Jinman's loyalty. That's why father sent us away. Seeing the two brothers present, Tulk quickly explained. Vlado's sword, RUNE, contained a potent poison, immune to all treatments, including magic. Both brothers now realized that Yevgen had not fled, but more pressing matters were at hand. Yevgen described the situation. A flash from the estate likely activated one of the Quere eyes, a spell allowing its wielder to observe vast distances. Archmage Jongnal was using it to track them. Their position was likely compromised, and Jurkin, weakened, gave Tulk a knowing glance. Tulk opened a portal, urging Yevgen to flee with their family legacy. Meanwhile, guided by Jongnal's ancient magic, Vlado led his forces towards Amara Lake, hatred burning in his eyes. His mind wandered back to when he, Jurkin, and Yenishka lived peacefully, until the horrifying night at the lake claimed their sister. Vlado reminisced about the days when sunlight filled their world, back when the three of them were carefree children, running through the green fields without worry. During those days as part of the Jinman family, the only person Vlado truly cared about was their younger sister, Yenishka. She was the most lovable princess in the world, always fair and the peacemaker between her brothers. But her tragic departure haunted Vlado. Years later, he confronted Jurkin, furious about Yenishka's arranged marriage to an opposing family. Jurkin tried to explain, saying it was her choice, but Vlado, filled with dark emotions, couldn't accept it. A few days later, he coldly led Yenishka to believe her fiancé was waiting at Lake Ara, unaware of his cruel intentions. Vlado had no intention of letting Yenishka actually reach the lake. He arranged for his men to temporarily abduct her in the forest. But plans often go awry. Chaos erupted when a servant ran from the woods, shouting that Yenishka had encountered the evil spirit at Lake Ara. Vlado, stunned, couldn't believe it. His men were supposed to stop her before she got near the lake. Jurkin, equally shocked but furious, pushed Vlado aside to handle the situation. When Vlado suggested calling for a healer, Jurkin stopped him coldly, saying Yenishka was no longer of this world. Jurkin, already suspecting Vlado's involvement in the plan, was in disbelief that his brother could cause such tragedy. But now, faced with the aftermath, Jurkin decided that only death could cleanse the spirit's curse. He drew his sword and confronted Yenishka's possessed body. Vlado, restrained by the servants, was forced to watch helplessly as Jurkin dealt the final blow, ending his sister's suffering. As the flashback ended, Vlado quickly commanded his soldiers to march into Lake Ara in search of the Jinman family. But soon after entering, they were met with a terrifying sight, a horde of undead creatures emerging from the lake, attacking the soldiers. Overcome with fear, 2/3 of the troops disobeyed orders and fled, leaving Vlado seething. Furious but undeterred, he charged forward, slicing through the undead. However, the more he fought, the more creatures appeared, and the stench of the lake's curse filled the air. Despite his fear, memories of the Jinman family fueled his determination. If he could just defeat Jurkin and his kin, these monsters would be nothing. As Yevgen stands before the portal, he hesitates but ultimately declares his refusal to leave, determined to protect his father and brother. Tulk warns that Vlado is approaching, but Yevgen insists that the family heirloom is meant for the darkest moments. He encourages Boris, who grapples with his feelings of jealousy but knows he doesn't want to survive alone. Tulk prepares to lead, urging them to stay hidden if he falls, while Yevgen remains resolute, reflecting on the ominous signs of fate surrounding them. The four of them approach the dark, deep waters of Lake Ara. Jurkin, weak and weary, ordered Tulk to stop. Gazing into the abyss, he thought of Yenishka, wondering if she was trapped there by a malevolent spirit, unable to find peace. But he was determined to reach her. Turning around, he saw Vlado and the wizard Jongnal. Vlado mocked him, reminding him of how he had abandoned Yenishka without a grave. Both brothers readied their swords, intent on settling their long-standing feud before facing the looming evil. Jurkin swung his sword at Vlado, shouting, "Didn't I save your life once? Yet you still refuse to see your own mistakes." He referenced the horrors Vlado had inflicted on Yenishka. Meanwhile, Tulk and Jongnal fought against the horde of undead, skills flying as they battled. Yevgen, surrounded by grotesque corpses, reassured Boris, promising to protect him with his ice sword and armor. Just as Yevgen regained his strength, Boris found himself in a blinding white space, sensing a red presence, eerily admiring his beauty. Boris panicked when he woke up, disoriented but relieved to see Yevgen. After embracing, Boris struggled to remember the chaos at Lake Ara. Yevgen explained their location, reassured him about their father, and shared plans to reach their aunt or the Duke Katsuya. Boris questioned why they couldn't live like ordinary people instead of relying on others. Yevgen admitted they were accustomed to a noble life and that the public likely viewed them with disdain. Just then, Boris's stomach grumbled, prompting them to seek food in a nearby village. Finally, the two of them arrived at a dimly lit inn, where the people here didn't seem very friendly. The innkeeper, seeing the handsome and youthful appearance of the two brothers, smiled maliciously and offered a room for the price of 10 elso. Yevgen, not familiar with the exchange rate, immediately took out a gold coin. The innkeeper and the people around him smiled cunningly, saying that these two must be wealthy young masters, carrying so much gold on them, and wanting to descend to the lower realm to see how the common people live. The innkeeper handed them a key and asked what they would like to eat tomorrow morning. Yevgen, feeling confused, expressed that anything would do. Another mocking sound echoed, but Yevgen didn't want to say anything more and pulled his younger brother away. Boris looked at the faces and malicious smiles around him, feeling horrified. The next morning, the inn staff brought a bowl to the two of them, with a sneering smile, reminding them to leave a review after they finished eating for these common folks. Boris looked at the bowl and covered his mouth in horror. Inside was a combination of milk and worms, enough to make anyone feel nauseous. Boris, overwhelmed by the disgusting dish, fainted. The onlookers continued mocking him, suggesting he try the local delicacy. One of them stood up, ready to teach the brothers how to eat it. Yevgen, enraged, swiftly grabbed the bully and slammed him onto the table, threatening him with a spoonful of the revolting mixture. Boris begged Yevgen to stop, which he did, choosing not to force anyone to eat something so vile. However, as they attempted to leave, they were surrounded by the hostile crowd, pushing Yevgen to reconsider drawing his weapon. Yevgen quickly revised his strategy, throwing a chair to distract the crowd. In the chaos, he heard Boris's cry for help. His brother was captured. The bullies were eager to torment the brothers, and one held the bowl of maggots, threatening to force Boris to eat. Enraged, Yevgen demanded they stop and offered to eat in Boris's place. As he swallowed the repulsive mixture, the crowd gasped. Standing tall, Yevgen declared himself Vlad Jinman, challenging the leader to a duel, causing fear among the bullies. Hearing the person in front of them was the son of the Lord Longard, it made this group of people start to pay attention. These two individuals turned out to be true young masters. It was all fun and games until the consequences caught up with them. Faced with the power of the person standing before them, the leader of the group could only introduce himself as Geet Pilon. Yevgen, on the other hand, expressed that in the face of a decisive battle, there would naturally be a winner and a loser, and now he would have to kill him. Upon hearing this, Geet Pilon immediately became frightened and changed his name to Bailon. But then he heard the person in front of him continue speaking. Yevgen coldly stated that he would not be so cruel to a commoner, so he would give him a chance to redeem himself. In the battle, if he admitted defeat and knelt down, then he would spare his life. In the face of the astonished gazes of the others, Yevgen added another bombshell, swearing on the honor of his family that he would make him eat that bowl clean. Boris, watching from afar, couldn't help but feel a bit scared seeing his older brother like this. Although he had seen his brother wield a sword before, he had never seen him in a decisive battle like this. In this moment, Yevgen looked like a different person. Yevgen didn't say much more, he ordered the other person to immediately draw his sword. Geet Pilon cautiously drew his sword, constantly reassuring himself that he might be spared. But the next turn of events made him reconsider. He only saw Yevgen draw his sword then, and the blade in his hand emitted a dazzling light. Geet Pilon, upon seeing it, immediately felt his face drained of blood. He had heard tales of it, the Winterer's prized sword, a weapon of the cold season. In the face of this situation, Geet Pilon was filled with even more fear. Not to mention the rumors that surrounded it, with his current status, engaging in a direct confrontation would be too reckless, with a high probability of death. Therefore, the only option left was to strike unexpectedly and swiftly. Thinking his doing, Geet Pilon immediately swung his sword forward, but one of his strikes was easily blocked by Yevgen. Even the force emanating from his sword was terrifyingly overwhelming, something an ordinary person could hardly withstand. Yevgen's eyes were still as green as ever, but now only coldness remained. He continued to swing another sword, gently carving the opponent's sword into two. Geet Pilon was horrified to see his sword shattered into two. The people around couldn't help but be horrified, only Boris kept his gaze on his older brother. While Geet Pilon was still in shock, Yevgen continued to swing one final sword to finish it. Geet Pilon knew that if he didn't surrender now, he would have to face the consequences. He immediately knelt down before Yevgen's sword pierced him, directly admitting defeat and surrendering. Upon hearing this, Yevgen coldly reminded him to fulfill his promise if he had already admitted defeat, to eat his specialty dish. Geet Pilon looked at the bowl with disgust. Boris wanted to say something, but Yevgen was quicker, ordering Geet Pilon to eat the disgusting dish. Trembling, Geet raised the spoonful of maggots to his mouth but couldn't bring himself to do it, promptly retching instead. The sight horrified Boris. Without wasting any time, Yevgen headed toward the door, urging Boris to leave with him. The tension in the air was palpable as they exited, leaving behind the chaos and disgust of the tavern, ready to face whatever awaited them outside. Finally, they both managed to rent another boarding house. Yevgen was lighting a lamp when he suddenly heard his younger brother calling him from the bed. He smiled and turned around, seeing Boris looking downcast. He immediately went to sit beside him. After a moment of silence, Boris spoke up about his thoughts. He was glad that his brother was safe and sound, and also happy that he had stood up against that wretched Pilon guy. But at that moment, he couldn't help but feel like his brother was a different person. Yevgen was taken aback by this revelation. Boris continued, saying that he didn't think what his brother did earlier was wrong. They had no other choice at that time. Moreover, if their father Jurkin was here, he would surely praise Yevgen. However, deep down, Boris felt an uncomfortable sensation. Yevgen smiled. No one understood him like Boris did. Yevgen sat down on the bed next to his younger brother and opened up. He realized that their father's words were not wrong that day, and now he wanted to pass them on to Boris, that they must not be soft-hearted. Yevgen expressed that if he could take care of Boris for the rest of his life, he would ensure his younger brother lived a happy and virtuous life. But with the current situation, he couldn't stay by Boris' side forever. He also had to find his own path in the future, and he had to find it himself. Therefore, he had to be even more strict and strong with himself. Facing Boris' downcast gaze, Yevgen held his younger brother's hand and earnestly reminded him, if you can't be a rock, then live like a clam, be secretive so that others can't see through you. Yevgen held his younger brother's hand, once again urging him to quickly understand this moral principle, because the world would not leave them in peace. Boris looked at his older brother and asked, so, you've decided to become a pawn, huh? Yevgen turned away, his face sinking into the darkness, silently admitting what his younger brother had just said. Boris nodded, showing that he understood. He believed that his older brother said those words out of fear that he would become weak and useless. After all, they only had each other to rely on now, with their father and the Jinman army not here. Upon hearing Boris' response, Yevgen told him to go to sleep and reminded him not to take off his armor, as danger still lurked everywhere. For safety, Yevgen urged Boris to go to bed first, while he stayed awake to keep watch. They would switch shifts at midnight. As night fell, the moon rested on top of their heads. Boris woke up suddenly, not understanding why his older brother hadn't called him yet. But at this moment, Boris witnessed a scene that left him stunned. His eldest brother, the heir of the Jinman family, was shedding tears of pain. His body trembled with each suppressed sob, trying not to make a sound to wake his younger brother. He tightly hugged his face with both hands. Boris, witnessing this heartbreaking sight, couldn't help but shed tears as well. He wanted to approach and comfort his older brother, but he wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. The voice echoed in Boris' mind. His older brother had chosen to become a pawn, so he wouldn't let him down or cause him any more pain. Boris gently turned around and lay back on the bed, tears seeping into the small pillow. The next morning, both of them set off again without a sound. Boris recalled the scene from the previous night, truly a sight he had never seen in his 12 years of life. The atmosphere now felt awkward and tense. Boris wanted to break this silence, so he pointed towards the clusters of purple flowers on the ground and asked his brother what kind of flowers they were. Yevgen simply replied that they were cornflowers. Back when they were still in the Jinman estate, his brother would always tell him stories about different types of flowers. Boris then asked him, "Did you forget the story about that flower?" Yevgen, tired and indifferent, made the air even more somber. They had traveled quite a distance, the sun had already set behind the hills, and they hadn't come across any towns, so they would have to sleep outside tonight. Both of them sat huddled by the crackling fire, and Boris heard a strange rustling sound, causing him to feel a bit anxious. Yevgen also heard the sound and quickly reminded Boris to grab his sword. He then stood up and shouted loudly, "You lot have been following us all the way here, yet you still choose to hide like a coward. What's the point of running away when there are so many of you?" Upon hearing these words, the group of people quickly emerged, their leader wearing a satisfied smile. He immediately ordered 500 men to advance and deal with the two of them. Their horses, in this unexpected situation, inexplicably fled, truly cowardly. In the midst of the bustling crowd, Yevgen suddenly caught sight of a familiar face, and indeed it was none other than Geet Pilon. The name Pilon was called out, causing him to become visibly uneasy. Another person approached, laughing heartily as he explained to his comrades that they were not here to help Geet Pilon resolve any grievances, but rather to seize the legendary ice sword. Upon hearing this, Yevgen became even more vigilant, recalling the events of the previous night when his determination to fight inadvertently revealed his identity, as well as the ice sword itself. Truly, The saying the more you have to lose held true. The leader wasted no more words and ordered his men to advance, their main objective being to claim the sword in Yevgen's possession. Since it was already exposed, there was no need to hide it any longer. Yevgen brandished the ice sword, defending himself against the onslaught of these individuals, sending a wave of attackers flying with a single strike. After all, such a precious treasure like the ice sword could not fall into the hands of these ordinary people. Another assailant rushed forward, but in the midst of Yevgen preparing to counterattack, he failed to notice a sudden swing of an iron chain from behind, tightly entangling his sword. It turned out that someone had launched a sneak attack from behind, but their victory was short-lived as they witnessed an unexpected scene. The ice sword suddenly emitted a blinding light, causing the iron chain to shatter into countless pieces, like a mere toy. Anyone who witnessed this couldn't help but be astonished, except for the leader who had already heard of the sword's reputation and was not surprised in the least. In fact, it only fueled his ambition to possess it even more. The ice sword, harboring legendary power and unparalleled techniques, had the ability to freeze any metal it touched, causing them to shatter into pieces. Surrounding Yevgen was a blanket of icy snow fog, the leader lowering his axe to the ground, not hiding his ambition to claim the ice sword as his own. But he was not foolish like the others. Seizing the opportunity while Yevgen was distracted, he had somehow appeared right in front of Boris, as if threatening Yevgen. If he didn't want to see his younger brother pierced with a hole in the game ending prematurely, he shouldn't act foolishly like this anymore. Yevgen felt a slight tension when he saw his little brother out there, their every move exposed. It wouldn't be difficult for him to fight against these people alone, but what about Boris? Just then, Boris unexpectedly responded to the arrogant leader, believing that 12 years of living in this world was not a short period of time. He thought he knew when he needed to make a move, but it definitely wouldn't be dying at the hands of these people. As he spoke, he raised his sword in a defensive stance. The leader sneered at his words, mocking his comrades, then quickly swung his axe, intending to strike the disobedient boy. Boris couldn't help but flinch when he saw the axe coming, but he maintained a serious expression. Yevgen, seeing the situation on the other side, immediately panicked and wanted to rush over, but just as he was about to grab his little brother, a dart suddenly appeared from nowhere, piercing the neck of the leader. Boris looked in horror as the man collapsed to the ground. The other group of people, like headless snakes, immediately panicked, but right after that, hundreds of other archers rushed in to attack. Blood spilled continuously. Yevgen quickly embraced his younger brother. Truly, without these archers, things would have been very bad, but who was the one shooting the bows? Some of the people in that group either fell early, while others ran away as if chased by ghosts from the scene. By the time they scattered, Yevgen then saw a strange group of 4 people appear from behind. Not letting down his guard, Yevgen unsheathed his sword to defend. The woman in the group, seeing this, smiled and took off her hat to tease them. Don't forget who just saved 2 people, this is the attitude towards saviors. Seeing that both of them still didn't let their guard down, the 4 people also expressed that they wouldn't ask for anything from both of them. After all, it seemed that both of them had nothing to take. Yevgen pondered, the malicious individuals from earlier were swiftly dealt with by this group of people in the blink of an eye. It couldn't be denied that they were all skilled, but the question remained, were they allies or just stronger enemies? One of the members spoke up, observing the 2 brothers and deducing that they must be sons of a wealthy clan. But there was no need to worry, as all they needed was this campfire. After some contemplation, Yevgen decided to sheath his sword and sincerely thank this group for their assistance, acknowledging their impressive abilities. Now, everyone took turns introducing themselves. The tall man with a bearded chin was Wills Kampf, the fair-skinned man with a beard was Joaquin, the one with long hair was Romevats July, and the final woman was Janaka Goth. Although everyone had revealed their names, Yevgen, due to his own identity, hesitated to disclose his own. Nonetheless, he agreed to sit together with them. Sitting in front of the flickering fire, Boris was lost in thought when suddenly an apple was thrown towards him. Janaka playfully teased him for not immediately eating it, reminding him that the apple was not poisoned and she wasn't a witch. Boris, reassured, placed the apple in his mouth. Janaka continued her conversation with Yevgen, remarking that Boris seemed quite young to be wandering alone in such a desolate land. She then shared about their group, a team that traveled around this area, taking on missions to earn money. Janaka also mentioned a place called the Deadly Wasteland, which caught Yevgen's attention. The Deadly Wasteland, where Ganapali had resided long ago, was also known as the Kingdom of Ghosts. It was a place of immense prosperity, with all the pillars of the buildings adorned with gold and gemstones. However, due to a war, it now lay in ruins, a desolate land filled with vengeful spirits and the undead. It was a place one could enter but never leave. After finishing the story, Janaka smiled teasingly at Yevgen, as if he was scared to the point of trembling. Yevgen expressed that he was only slightly surprised, because the group of people could escape from there and still survive, which was quite unbelievable. However, in his understanding, the Deadly Land was not a place to visit frequently, a place just like its name suggests. Romevats, upon hearing this, proved it to them by taking out a small vial of liquid and dropping a drop onto his arrowhead, then holding it up. The substance sticking to the arrowhead was a deadly poison, strong enough to kill even a ghost, even if it had already been killed. Yevgen and Boris were astonished to hear this. Janaka saw Romevats boasting for a while before revealing the truth, that they had never actually been to the Deadly Land of Ganapoli, they only wandered near it and brought back things that the vengeful spirits living there had once worn. At this moment, Janaka took out a golden bracelet and showed it to them before throwing it to Boris. Boris raised the bracelet and examined it closely. On this bracelet were engraved paintings, one of a dancing figure in a golden world that seemed real. It couldn't be denied that this was an extremely exquisite item. Even just by looking at the bracelet, the sparkling grains of sand under the sunlight, the straight columns of gold, and the ruby-studded floor seemed to convey a whole magnificent world. As night fell, Yevgen and Boris followed the group of people to a nearby inn. Janaka and the innkeeper chatted comfortably. Yevgen and Boris didn't want to sleep next to dead bodies, so they followed them, but their vigilance was still high. Janaka threw the room key to both of them before leaving, and Yevgen felt a little touched and grateful to this woman. The remaining people also chatted comfortably with each other before returning to their rooms. Boris also felt a bit tired and wanted to go back to his room, and Yevgen also believed that tonight they could sleep well and have some peace of mind, at least no one would chase after them anymore. Boris dreamt of a childhood memory, when he was playing outside and accidentally encountered a peculiar man. This man claimed to be his uncle and approached him with familiarity, inviting him to play an intriguing game. This uncle, or rather Vlado, lifted Boris high in the air, filling him with joy. But then, Vlado's smile turned maniacal, muttering something under his breath as he carried Boris towards a well not far away. Boris sensed something was amiss and wanted to escape, but Vlado's hand placed him right in the middle of the well, as if a gentle release would send him plummeting to his demise. In the midst of this peril, Boris finally woke up, but something seemed off. He found himself bound with his hands behind his back. Seeing Yevgen also tied up, Boris was filled with panic. Yevgen wasted no time and urged them to escape quickly, as the ice sword had disappeared. Hearing this, Boris was horrified, unable to comprehend why this was happening and who had taken the sword. In Boris' state of distress, Yevgen suddenly burst into laughter, despite the pain etched on his face. He told Boris that they were both clever. Yevgen admitted to being just a child who knew nothing about the outside world, but he hoped that when Boris reached his age, he wouldn't be deceived anymore. To achieve that, Yevgen murmured, he would teach Boris what he should have learned from his father. Yevgen smiled, a cool breeze in his voice, reminding them that they had to go quickly, to return to those wretched people what they had taken from them. After cutting the rope and leaving the room, Yevgen didn't say much as he went downstairs and threw a bundle of money at the landlord, coldly interrogating him to find out who had imprisoned them. In the face of Yevgen's icy gaze, the landlord trembled in fear and mumbled, realizing that these two were not ordinary people if they were able to escape without fighting back. Seeing the landlord's continued evasiveness, Yevgen raised his sword to threaten him, but then heard him mention the weak point that the group of people were currently exploiting. This only fueled Yevgen's anger, and the landlord revealed that the wretched individuals were led by Janaka. Yevgen was taken aback by this revelation. It was only then that the landlord bluntly revealed the harsh truth. Janaka's gang had sold them both to the mercenary army known as Lake Ara, a group that bought and used people as hired soldiers until they made enough money. Upon hearing this, Yevgen's expression turned cold, and he coldly inquired about the whereabouts of Janaka's gang. The landlord, not wanting to be beaten any further, revealed their location, the Helmer Tavern, and warned them that the gang would be on the move again tonight. With the necessary information in hand, Yevgen turned his cold face and called for Boris to hurry, as they needed to move quickly. Boris looked at the once cheerful face of his older brother, now unfamiliar and filled with a hint of fear. In the evening, Yevgen and Boris stood outside Helmer's Tavern, hiding behind barrels of wine as they peered inside. Yevgen urged Boris to stay outside and observe, while he himself boldly stepped into the tavern. He had to punish those who had deceived and betrayed him, and allow Boris to witness it all, for it was a lesson the young boy needed to learn about the harsh realities of life. Yevgen always wished he could keep his younger brother innocent and kind-hearted forever, but time did not allow him to do so. Yevgen entered the tavern and immediately spotted two drunken men, Joaquin and Wills Kampf, laughing and joking. Janaka and Romevats were nowhere to be seen, but Yevgen quickly approached, grabbing a tray and a small sword behind his back. In their drunken stupor, Wilscombe mistook Yevgen for a waiter and showed no strong reaction. Yevgen skillfully played the role of a waiter, telling them that there was a lady waiting for them outside. Wilscombe immediately assumed that the person the waiter was referring to was Janaka Goth, furrowing his brow in confusion. She had said she wanted to meet the merchants first and instructed them to meet at the village gate. It was only then that Joaquin realized something was amiss and looked up. The sight that met his eyes was enough to send shivers down his spine. Before they could comprehend what was happening, Yevgen swiftly struck both men and, grabbing the prepared knife, forcefully stabbed down, pinning Joaquin's hand to the table, leaving him startled. Wilscombe, witnessing this, also panicked and reached for his sword, eager to engage in a fight. Yevgen had no interest in killing these foolish men. He had come here with one sole purpose, to retrieve the legendary ice blade. Wilscombe swung his sword without much thought, but Yevgen effortlessly dodged the attack, simultaneously interrogating him about the whereabouts of the ice blade. Naturally, Yevgen could easily handle this man, and once again he asked, "Where is the blade?" He even threatened to bid farewell to his own wrist if he didn't speak up. Faced with the intimidating aura emanating from his opponent, Wilscombe felt a tinge of fear. Yevgen then used his foot to strike the table, causing Joaquin's hands to ache with pain. Finally, Joaquin couldn't take it anymore and immediately revealed that Janaka was the one holding the sword. Furthermore, he mentioned that she and Romevats were planning to sell it for money. Wilscombe was furious at Joaquin's betrayal and warned him that Janaka would not forgive them both. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Wilscombe quickly stood up and ran away, not forgetting to threaten Yevgen along the way and mention the name of a group called the Blackbird Thieves. Joaquin was left with no choice but to admit defeat. He shouted that the cooperation between them was over. He muttered to himself that it was a crazy plan and he shouldn't have gotten involved in this dirty scheme from the beginning. When you play with fire, you get burned. Joaquin spilled all the beans, revealing that Janaka had left to negotiate about the sword. But with his understanding of her, he was certain that she only pretended to leave and actually wanted to keep the sword for herself. On the other hand, Romevats's main weapon was a bow and arrow, so he only wanted to sell the sword to split the money. Joaquin told Yevgen everything he knew and advised him to go to the northern gate of Lang Luke at midnight, where he would meet Janaka and the mercenary group she was dealing with. But if Janaka saw Yevgen, they would definitely try to hand him over to the mercenaries right away. Joaquin warned Yevgen that Janaka Goth was a dangerous woman. After hearing Joaquin's confession, Yevgen finally put away his sword and took out a knife from his hand, expressing that if he couldn't retrieve the frostblade, he shouldn't hope to escape either. In the darkness, Yevgen walked towards the northern gate, with Boris following closely behind, neither uttering a word to the other. Boris glanced up at his older brother, hearing the bitter sigh that escaped his lips. Yevgen silently acknowledged that things would only get worse from now on, as he looked down at his blood-stained hands and confessed to Boris that he had ultimately failed. Despite his efforts, he had still taken a life. The knife slipped from Yevgen's grasp and fell to the ground. A fire burned within Boris, a desire to scream at his brother, to tell him that he wasn't the person he believed himself to be. That everything he had done was for Boris, to protect him. When Yevgen was inside the tavern, Boris had hidden outside, witnessing it all. The young boy had been terrified, shocked, and silenced, afraid to make a sound or even look. Yevgen reminded Boris, "When you have someone to protect, you will do anything, even if it means taking a life." Boris wanted to say something, but Yevgen interrupted him. He spoke not to protect Boris, but to make him value himself, just as Yevgen could do anything for him. In the future, Boris must also do everything for himself, cherish and protect himself above all else, even the icy sword. Only then can he avoid death, abandonment, and suffering. It seemed like Yevgen's words were alluding to some painful memory that he had endured. After all, he just wanted to remind Boris to live until the very end, to endure this world full of pain. They had reached the northern gate and quickly climbed onto the roof to observe. They soon found Janaka and Romevats, happily discussing something. Yevgen had been observing for a while but still couldn't find the ice blade anywhere. Furthermore, the guy named Wilscombe, after leaving the stable, hadn't arrived here either. Boris looked into the distance and spotted a group of people approaching Janaka's location. It was likely the notorious mercenaries, Lake Ara. As Yevgen knew, they were renowned warriors who emerged from the war. A giant bald man shouted as he approached. He was Diraki, the captain of the Lake Ara mercenaries. They had come here because Janaka had expressed a desire to negotiate. Janaka approached them respectfully. But Diraki was cold and demanded that Janaka and Romavas compensate his team, as the two individuals they had sold to his team had already escaped. Janaka wasn't afraid and believed that those who had fled should blame themselves for being too late, as her group had already completed their mission. Diraki didn't give her many options, either double the compensation or Janaka and Romavisk would have to join the mercenary team to make up for the two who had escaped that morning. Janaka wanted to curse at them, feeling that these people were disrespecting her. But Romavisk quickly stopped her and calmly approached to mediate between the two sides. He still wanted to present the newly found ice blade for compensation, but then Janaka shouted loudly and threw a bag of money towards the mercenaries, considering it as compensation, with no intention of giving them the newly found sword. Diraki looked at the amount of gold coins and reiterated that they wanted double the compensation. If they couldn't pay the full amount and refused to work, they would eliminate both of them quickly. Janaka and Romavisk frowned upon hearing this. These people wanted to double the amount of money. In a critical moment, Janaka suddenly had an idea and asked Diraki if they agreed to work, would he intend to keep them as permanent workers in the team? Romavisk frowned, making it clear that they didn't want to become slaves. Diraki replied that they would release the two if they both performed well. A physician in Travaix had hired 50 people to complete the mission, but the team still owed 2 people, so they needed a total of 50 people for the contract. Janaka smiled and said as long as they performed well in this mission, it would be enough. While they were talking, Janaka accidentally dropped her hood, revealing the dazzling ice blade. Yevgen had seen it while Janaka was negotiating and immediately stepped forward. Janaka was surprised to see that the 2 guys she had deceived yesterday hadn't run away yet. Yevgen jumped down, drew his sword, and told Janaka to quickly return the sword to him. Boris quickly approached his older brother. Romavisk was surprised to see Yevgen here, wondering why they were running away like fools and hiding in a tiger's den. Janaka sensed the energy emanating from Yevgen and didn't respond to him, instead looking towards Diraki, wanting him to quickly take these 2 runaway boys as slaves, as they were not involved. Yevgen pointed his sword towards Janaka, telling her that there are no slaves in this country, they cannot be sold by her. Janaka smirked, still thinking that a weakling like Yevgen and his little brother should obediently follow their orders. A rookie who dares to confront her, if he wants, he can run home and cry to his mother. Yevgen's anger grew when she mentioned his mother. At this moment, for some unknown reason, Boris suddenly spoke up, shouting loudly that Janaka was the weak one. She only attacked when they were both asleep, so what was there to be proud of? Thinking back to the night by the campfire, the fake conversations and false hopes they had given, only to be betrayed in the end, Boris couldn't hold back his tears of anger as he shouted that Janaka's gang was nothing special, just a bunch of cowards who took advantage of others' trust. They were not warriors, just a group of deceivers. Diraki heard these words and couldn't help but look at the young boy. Janaka and Romavisk being insulted by a 12-year-old boy made him feel embarrassed, but in this situation, she just wanted to quickly hand over Yevgen and Boris to the mercenaries and get her money before leaving. But Diraki then said to them, let's settle this with a fight. He set the rules for both. The losing side will have to be sold to the hired team, the winning side will be able to leave unconditionally, but he also gently reminded warmly that, if you participate in the fight and lose, you will not be taken away happily. Yevgen and Janaka stood on opposite sides. Janaka was extremely confident that victory would lean towards her. She reached behind and intended to use her sword, but then she thought better of it. She didn't want to be targeted by the hired team, especially if Diraki saw it, as they would surely want to take it for themselves. Therefore, Janaka decided to swing her sword and attack, swiftly charging towards Yevgen. Yevgen could dodge in an instant, and he couldn't deny that this woman's technique was very fast. Seeing Yevgen's expression, Janaka became even more certain of her own victory, continuously attacking Yevgen. Although he could avoid it, he still suffered a few wounds. Boris, watching from a distance, couldn't help but worry as the disadvantage seemed to be leaning towards his older brother. After all, Janaka Goth was indeed very strong, and this was the first time he witnessed his brother getting injured in a fight like this. At this moment, Boris suddenly sensed a sound from the tree behind him, feeling as if someone was hiding there. But on the other side, Janaka, with her quick and light movements, managed to land a hit on Yevgen, causing him to salivate. Boris, seeing this, became extremely tense and no longer paid attention to what was behind him. Yevgen was poked, but he didn't panic. While Janaka was still pleased, he reached out and grabbed her, leaving her confused about what was happening. From the beginning to the end, his only goal was the ice sword. Yevgen touched the hilt of the sword, and without hesitation, he pulled it out and unleashed the freezing technique. Before Janaka could understand what was happening, she was frozen like a Jurassic fossil, which meant that the winner was Yevgen. The people around witnessing this scene were also extremely shocked. Yevgen looked towards the Diraki leader, reminding him that the battle had ended and the winner was him, only him. Diraki looked towards Janaka, who had been frozen, not many words nodded, allowing Yevgen and his younger brother to leave here, which also meant a victory for them. Boris saw that he won and happily rushed to hug him. Romevats couldn't believe it and looked towards Janaka being frozen. This doesn't mean that he will have to become a slave and follow the mercenaries. In this situation, Romevats immediately pulled out the poisoned arrow, wanting to shoot towards the two brothers Yevgen and Boris for revenge, almost to the bitter end. But before the arrow could be loaded, 3 knives flew from nowhere, straight into Romevats' arm, causing him to collapse in pain. Yevgen and Boris heard the noise and looked over. Diraki looked towards Romevats. How dare he play dirty tricks in front of him? He called out the name Naya, from the tree, and the person called immediately appeared. Naya, a girl with white hair and purple eyes, quickly disarms Romevats, holding a knife to his throat. He angrily accuses Diraki and the rescue team of betrayal, questioning their loyalty. Diraki orders his men to clean up the mess, and Romevats is taken into custody. Yevgen taunts Romevats about his lack of respect for maternal values, warning him not to face his mother again. Naya briefly locks eyes with Boris before following Diraki's orders and leaving without speaking. In his dream, Boris suddenly realized the abnormalities of the 4 people that night. Janaka and her team had never wondered why the 2 of them had to run away. They must have approached the 2 brothers with the intention of stealing and selling them from the beginning. Even when going to sleep, Boris couldn't help but worry. The horse had run away since the day before, and all the money had been stolen. Now, how would the 2 of them survive? They would have to sleep outside forever. But despite the despair, Boris still felt relieved. At least his older brother was safe, and they had recovered the ice sword. That was enough. But suddenly, in his dream, Boris felt like someone was crazily choking him. He was extremely scared, feeling like he was about to die. In his unconsciousness, he shouted loudly, calling his older brother's name to be saved. At this moment, the hand on his neck immediately loosened, and Boris took the opportunity to quickly break free and fall down. After that, Boris woke up in shock, thinking that what just happened was just a dream. He looked around for a while and saw his older brother lying on the ground. Seeing that he was still breathing, Boris breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that Yevgen must have been very tired and fell asleep, but nothing happened to him. Boris gently covered his older brother with a blanket and then went back to sleep with peace of mind. While he was sinking into sleep, he didn't notice that his older brother, Yevgen, suddenly opened his eyes, his face full of pain and madness, breathing heavily and hugging his own body tightly. The next morning, Yevgen and Boris went to a pawn shop to sell some items and get money to cover their expenses after being robbed by Janaka's gang. Yevgen took out an item carefully wrapped in a cloth, which was a very elegant and luxurious mirror adorned with sparkling diamonds. The shop owner quickly took the mirror to examine every detail. The item was not bad, well preserved, and didn't seem to have too many scratches, although it was quite old and had a name engraved on it. Therefore, the owner offered 300 elso for it. Upon hearing this, Yevgen was taken aback and hesitated, softly asking the owner if that price was too low. The owner looked down on the 2 brothers and said that the mirror was not in pristine condition anymore, and selling it for a higher price would be like stealing from him. If they were not satisfied, they could go somewhere else to sell it. He also mentioned that in pawn shops like his and others, no item would be sold for more than 200 elso. The initial price he offered to both of them was already very good. Regardless, this mirror used to be very popular and fashionable among the noble class, but now it was outdated. Even young children in the village only used it to play marbles. Boris couldn't bear to part with the mirror, as it was a very precious item to him. However, Yevgen immediately interrupted Boris and agreed to sell the mirror for the shop owner's price of 300 elso. Upon hearing this, Boris felt sad as he watched the mirror being sold. Yevgen took the meager sum of 300 elso and brought his younger brother to a restaurant. They ordered some delicious food and Yevgen urged Boris to eat quickly, as they had been struggling for days. Boris sadly took a long time to eat a piece of bread, wondering how Yevgen could enjoy this meal when it was so expensive. 300 elso was an outrageous price, and even if it were 3,000 elso, Yevgen would never sell it if they weren't in this desperate situation. Furthermore, this meal was made from their mother's belongings, and Boris only needed bread and water, but Yevgen insisted on buying the best food for himself. After hesitating for a while, Boris finally asked his older brother, "When will our father contact us?" Upon hearing this, Yevgen sighed and said it would probably be a while, as their father was still recovering from his injuries. Maybe they would be reunited when their father got better, so for now, they should eat and live healthily. Only then could the 2 brothers meet their father. Although Yevgen said these words, his trembling hands made Boris feel that something was not right. But he didn't dare to say anything more, just nodded in agreement and quickly finished the food. Boris looked at Yevgen's smiling face, but all he saw was a tormented soul trying to force a smile. In the darkness of the night, Boris once again felt himself being choked in his dream, surrounded by eerie sounds like a monstrous creature. He struggled to break free from the grip of those hands, wondering why he kept experiencing this dream over and over again. Perhaps it was due to his strong inner turmoil. Boris tried his best to wake up, exerting all his strength. When he finally opened his eyes, the sight before him left him stunned and bewildered, causing him to gasp in astonishment. The person crazily choking him was none other than his older brother, Yevgen. Yevgen, with his blue eyes, now glimmered with a red hue like blood. His hands clenched Boris' throat and lifted him up, his face cold and emotionless as if he were looking at a worthless object. Then, he threw him aside into a corner. Boris, in tears from the pain, saw his brother eyeing the ice sword as if planning to kill him with it. Feeling a sense of doom, Boris quickly stood up, despite the pain, and rushed toward Yevgen to stop him, crying out in fear, asking why his brother would do such a thing, and begging him to snap out of it. Hearing Boris's desperate pleas, Yevgen's cold expression finally showed a hint of change. Boris woke up once again, but this time the sky had been bright for a while. He looked out in astonishment and saw his brother Yevgen had returned to normal, wearing a gentle smile as always, his soulful blue eyes replacing the horrifying red eyes from last night. Yevgen worriedly asked Boris if he had just had a nightmare, why his face looked so pale. Looking at his gentle older brother in front of him, he couldn't help but remember the cold face and red eyes from last night, when this brother had tried to kill him. Boris was terrified, trying to put on a normal appearance to avoid suspicion, but then he felt a sharp pain in his back. Yevgen heard his younger brother's cry and quickly approached to check on him. Boris, thanks to this pain, remembered the events of last night, horrified to realize that it wasn't just a dream, it was all real. He quickly turned away, trying to come up with an explanation. Perhaps he had been too drunk and had fallen off the bed last night, causing his back to hurt. Yevgen smiled helplessly, asking if Boris had slept poorly due to exhaustion from the previous night, as he normally wouldn't roll around and fall off the bed. He comforted his younger brother, saying that they had rested enough yesterday and needed to continue their journey today. But Boris, at that moment, seemed to not hear clearly, feeling a chilling emptiness in his heart. The sky remained bright and blue as ever while the two brothers continued walking forward. Boris trailed behind, his mind swirling with thoughts of the horrifying events from the previous night. He was certain it hadn't been a dream Yevgen had truly attacked him. However, Boris couldn't believe his brother would ever deliberately try to kill him. Something must be wrong. Reflecting on Yevgen's unusual behavior, including his feverish grip and absent expression, Boris finally summoned the courage to ask, "Yevgen, are you all right?" Yevgen hesitated, claiming he was fine, but his shaky steps betrayed the truth. Boris realized Yevgen was unwell and feared they might not reach Aunt Janine's estate in time. A series of thoughts rushed in. Boris couldn't bear it anymore. He grabbed his own coat, panicked, and asked Yevgen, "Is it true that father won't come?" Yevgen hesitated upon hearing this, wanting to deny it. But this time, Boris didn't want his older brother to continue hiding from him. He approached, wanting him to be honest about what had happened, whether father had been kidnapped by Uncle Vlado or not. Exhausted from the relentless questioning of his younger brother, Yevgen sat down on a rock. Boris also began to realize that the events of the past few days were truly strange. It was clear that the rebellion had occurred that day. He still vividly remembered the monstrous creature Kriegel being summoned from another world, devouring the Jinman estate on that day. There was also the bizarre creature that tried to kill him in the Emerald Lake, which his older brother had slain. But for Boris, those memories seemed blurry. He couldn't recall what had happened, what he had seen at Lake Ara, and what had happened to their father. Right at that moment, Yevgen spoke up. He didn't want to hide another second, desperate to admit that their father would not return. Yevgen finally recounted the events of that day. The outcome of the battle was clear. Vlado and his army had emerged victorious, and the butler Tulk had gone with Jurkin in the final moments. Memories of that day also began to resurface in Boris' mind. While they were fighting the undead, from within Lake Ara, a colossal monster had awakened and headed towards them. The monster, with its blood-red eyes, seemed to have Boris in its sights. Perhaps he was its target. But at that very moment, a hand pulled him back. Yevgen had pushed him away, to face the monster alone. Drops of blood splattered towards Boris, and he desperately called out his older brother's name. Staring at the monstrous creature ahead, Boris shuddered as he recalled the old woman's tale from that fateful night. It was the wraith in the Emerald Lake that she had spoken of. It bore no resemblance to any living or dead creature. Its eyes were like fiery orbs, piercing through the very fabric of this world. If it chose someone, that person would surely meet their demise. On that day, the wraith had pinned down Boris' older brother, Yevgen, with its colossal wings, while Boris had turned and fled, a coward who never once looked back. But what had become of Yevgen in the end? Boris didn't know, for he had run away like a coward, leaving Yevgen to face the Wraith's wrath for trying to protect him. Returning to the present, nightfall, both sat in silence, gazing at the burning fire, not uttering a word to each other. After a moment of tranquility, Yevgen finally spoke, but his words were filled with immense pain. Boris, when we wake up tomorrow, let's go our separate ways, it's best that we part. I can't stay by your side anymore, my time is running out. Boris, bewildered for a moment, was then overwhelmed with despair. He bowed his head, without hesitation, rejecting his older brother's proposition. He wanted to be with Yevgen until their final moments, regardless of the circumstances. Yevgen just smiled helplessly, unable to speak the painful truth. If he were to continue his anger tonight, he could very well end up killing his own younger brother. Yevgen remembered vividly that the Wraith of Lake Ara was the one who killed Aunt Yenishka. Aunt Yenishka was a kind and generous woman, but after returning from Lake Ara, she was no longer the aunt he once knew. Yevgen still vividly recalled the horrifying scene that day. It wasn't Aunt Yenishka's voice, but the scream of a monster, with blood-red eyes, cold and merciless. And as Father Jurkin had said, madness caused by the Wraith can only be ended by death. Yevgen understood that he would soon become like Aunt Yenishka, insane and devoid of humanity. This time, he held out the ice sword towards Boris, wanting him to try it, to draw the sword and swing it. Boris listened to his older brother's words, but in truth, it still felt a bit heavy for him, just like the first time. Yevgen reached from behind and lifted the little boy's hand, taking a breath. If only Boris could grow a little bigger, if only he could survive until then, until he could see him grow up. Boris heard these words and couldn't help but despair, tears streaming down his face. But Yevgen also knew the harsh reality, that Boris couldn't grow up right away, and the remaining time for him was passing by quickly. Sooner or later, he would harm the person he loved the most, his own younger brother. Boris uttered these words with even more despair. You know, it seems like Yevgen is about to abandon him, but he doesn't want that, he doesn't want to be left alone in this world. Finally, Boris shed tears, directly throwing the ice sword to the ground, expressing that he doesn't care whether his brother will kill him or not. Yevgen wants him to survive, but how can he survive out there on his own? The villains are chasing after the sword, just like the Winterer gang. Perhaps they will be even more ruthless and powerful than the foes they have faced before. Boris rushed to Yevgen's side. He wants to be by his brother's side. He would rather be killed by his brother than face those things. Yevgen couldn't help but feel heartbroken. He tried to suppress the pain. In an instant, Boris received a resounding slap across his face. Yevgen scolded Boris, wondering if he had forgotten everything he had ever said. Tears streamed down his face as he questioned how Boris could possibly forget what Yevgen wanted most, for him to survive. Yevgen was in anguish, reminding Boris never to speak of his own death again. After Yevgen left, Boris had to become stronger. Yevgen held his younger brother close, whispering, "From today onwards, there will be no one else to shield you. You won't be able to rest in the shade anymore. Don't trust or lower your guard against anyone. The path ahead will be difficult, but I believe you can do it, because you must survive. You must strive to survive until you can see the countless possibilities that will unfold in your life." Yevgen took the sword, placing it back in its sheath and handing it to Boris, expressing his wish that if he were to lose control again, Boris would use it to end him. Yevgen remembers, the memories of him are breaking into pieces. He can't remember what he did during the time he lost his memory, nor can he know if he went crazy and screamed like a monster like Aunt Yenishka, and whether his best friend Boris was scared then. There are days when Yevgen thinks it's morning now, but by the time he regains his mind, it's already afternoon, and they can only build a campfire when dusk falls. Every time it's dark at night, looking up at the bright stars in the sky, Yevgen becomes some kind of monster, no longer himself. Yevgen has lived with horrifying fears, afraid that he would kill Boris while he was out of his mind, and when he opens his eyes, the boy's body will be right in front of him, terrifyingly. Another sunset has arrived. Boris, after going to fetch firewood, sees his older brother Yevgen nodding off under a tree. His face has become extremely pale. Yevgen hasn't slept for 3 days, so that he wouldn't lose his mind and harm his younger brother. Yevgen doesn't even realize that 3 days have passed. After trying to regain some clarity, Yevgen quickly takes off his armor and hands it to Boris, wanting his younger brother to take it. He knows he can no longer use it. Boris doesn't want to accept it. They have already agreed. This armor belongs to Yevgen, while the ice sword belongs to him. Yevgen smiles as if not smiling, helpless. What use is armor for someone who is about to die? Yevgen feels like he's about to give in. He tries to say his final words of advice to Boris. He doesn't want Boris to seek revenge. In a long period of time, For centuries, many noble families of the Treveix region have continuously torn each other apart in political wars. Perhaps if they had chosen to abandon their hatred or forgive one another, all the tragedies would not have occurred. Yevgen tells Boris a story about that day. Even though his father and uncle were determined to fight each other, in the end, it was the cursed mark, the wraith, that killed his father, the same wraith that attacked him that day. Yevgen hopes that Boris will never be caught up in such hateful wars within their Jinman clan. He wants Boris to explore and discover new things as he grows up. And by then, he hopes Boris will forget everything that is happening now, choose to forgive them, and let go of it all to live. He wants Boris to become strong with the Winterer set and continue living, not getting entangled in the cycle of power and strength, tragedy and hatred. As night fell, Boris slept soundly, while Yevgen sat silently, gazing into the flickering flames before him. He fought against the pull of sleep, knowing that if he succumbed, his younger brother would be in danger. The lurking predators could strike from anywhere, just as he himself could. But in a hazy dream, he saw his parents waving to him from a distance, with Boris by his side, gently guiding him into a peaceful slumber and sharing his blanket. Yet, Yevgen awoke fully aware, looking up at the sky. He saw it, the shooting stars soaring across the night sky, a breathtaking and vibrant sight that touched his soul. Yevgen stood up, feeling a newfound clarity, knowing the last thing he could do for his brother was to set him free from the chains of suffering. After a weary day, it was time to rest. The comet left its mark in its wake, and all was calm within the embrace of their parents. The rays of sunlight awakened Boris, who looked around and couldn't find his older brother. But in the distance, there was a deep hole. Boris seemed to understand something and slowly approached it. Yevgen had departed, ending his own life with a swift stroke of the icy blade. The early morning sunbeams shone into the depths of the hole, revealing a serene expression on his face, as if he had finally found the peace he had longed for.